With John Heilman to preview the November elections and why things are getting complicated now for Republicans.
Look, Joe, I mean, I'm struck by the same thing you are, right? Because we're both students of history, and in a midterm election where the in power president had his approval rating in the 30s, and the main economic variable for a lot of people in their lives, which is inflation, even if it's maybe getting a little more under control right now, it's still way too high, and people talk about it all the time.
Maybe someone that goes on national media organizations constantly should have access to someone that can actually tell them what's going on. Isn't it nice that the media and students of history have no understanding of people trying to overthrow the government and how that can affect the election? It's truly astonishing, has no evidence for it, and constantly tells us that Republicans should win because, they only tried to overthrow America.
Out here in America, in a circumstance like that, you should be looking at a landslide for Republicans. And I think Republicans thought that's what they were looking at.
Why? Why should we be looking at a landslide? What have Republicans done to solve any problems? Was it the refusal to pass a bill for our veterans that gets them the correct votes to win in a landslide? What is it that the media has told people in America? Republicans' talking points? And now that they don't know what everyone is going along with? Shouldn't they understand? What exactly is his argument?
As recently as the spring, and then a bunch of stuff happened. And I think, you got kind of a holy trinity or an unholy trinity of bad things for Republicans. The first of them being the Uvalde shooting, raising the gun issue. The second being the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. And the third being these 1/6 committee hearings, putting Donald Trump back in the spotlight. And those three things.
So, his argument: Americans can see what Republicans are doing, and they don't like it. Oh God, how is the media going to fix this? They haven't been telling America the truth about Republicans, and now they can see it. What would happen if the media has been telling America the truth for decades? We wouldn't have had Republicans trying to overthrow the United States of America. That is what would have happened.
Things have created not just a messaging opportunity for Democrats who do want to knit them together and turn them into a national message about Republicans being the party of extremism, but even before Democrats have effectively done that, if they ever effectively do that, a lot of people in the country see it on their own. And
Hey. Can the Democrats do this? I'll make sure they'll fail. That's what he's saying. Can the Democrats create a narrative to break through the media to get to the American people? Not while this guy's in charge, and not while a Republican hosts hours on MSNBC, the so-called liberal network.
And that's the power potentially of that message, is that you've already seen this movement in the polls. Just really the timing of it is clear enough. I mean, Republicans were leading in the congressional generic ballot until basically about May or late May, early June. And all of a sudden, Democrats are in a place they shouldn't be. And
Democrats shouldn't be? This is unique and should be looked at. Why shouldn't Democrats be here? Because the media has damaged Democrats. That's the only reason.
I think that tells you something about, how what an potentially extraordinary and historic year this is. If Democrats can buck those two big factors, Biden's low approval ratings and inflation, and hold the House of Representatives, or even limit their losses in the House of Representatives, that will be an amazing thing, and it'll tell you how much Republicans have really screwed this up.
Listen to that. Republicans have screwed it up and should be taking power. Americans seeing reality is how Republicans screwed it up.
It's been fascinating, John, that Democrats have had, it seems, just so much bad news after Biden's election. Just one day after another, the news all has seemed bad. Over the past 6 months, it seems to have broken in a different direction. You're right.
When he was elected? You mean when he was cleaning up after the mess the Republican administration left? Lately, things have been getting better. Now that Democrats are completely running the government for long enough to clean up the messes that were left for them. It is like the media hasn't been analyzing why things have happened, but just telling you that they've happened.
There's been a close examination of the January 6 hearings. 20 million people watching the first hearing. All of the hearings have seemed to capture many Americans' imagination. You look at the debate around just the most extreme positions Republicans have taken on guns, the most extreme positions Republicans are taking on abortion, so much so that you have people who are NRA members who were offended by those extreme positions, 18-year-olds being able to buy weapons of war. And on abortion, my gosh, you look at, it's just a horrifying news story every day, whether it's a 10-year-old girl having to flee her home state of Ohio because she fears that she's going to be forced to have her rapist's baby in a forced birth. You look at Texas Republicans that are trying to take away protections to protect a mother's life if her life is in danger. I mean, I must say, I know we don't get shocked by much, but I'll admit, even I'm shocked by how extreme Republicans have gotten, especially on these social issues.
If Joe, I swear I'm not a Republican, is shocked, is because he still wants to believe that he isn't a bad person for helping build Twitler's party. This has been what liberals have been saying for years. It is strange we have a Republican and a media hack on to discuss how the Democrats are winning.
Well, and it tells you something, Joe, about how much of that, the battle over abortion and what we know is basically a 50-year war on the part of the right to life movement, the anti-abortion movement, to try to take out Roe, right?
What? He now figured it out that it was a 50-year war? Let me guess. Just because your job as a reporter is to pay attention and understand what is going on, it's up to those that watch you to go in and spend hours trying to figure out if your delusion is just that. The fact that he has no understanding what the Republican Party has been doing for decades should get him fired. And Joe Scarborough, fired. The fact that they have to discuss this like it is, some interesting and new development is very specifically because they're not good enough at their job to be on national television.
I say this, I use the word great here in the neutral sense, but it's one of the great kind of political achievements of any social movement in America. I mean, they did this thing that they worked at in an aggressive, disciplined way for 50 years, and they finally got the thing that no one thought they would ever get, which was to get Roe v. Wade off the books, right?
He doesn't think that they would get it, and knows he has to gaslight everyone as if We couldn't see this coming?
So just as a matter of political organizing, discipline, patience, you have to basically say that's quite an achievement on the part of that movement. And then sitting here 6 months before the midterm elections, when they knew the Democrats would and women across the country would be fired up by the fact that the court had done this, instead of kind of like taking the foot off the gas and saying, that Roe v. Wade is gone now, we can afford not to try to ram through the most aggressive, the most radical, the most punitive policies in imaginable. That would have been the politically smart thing to do. I think you agree. Just, take some time here. Don't give the Democrats this massive issue heading into these November elections. But they're so extreme on this question.
Yes, those extreme radicals. Why can't they act reasonably? I don't understand what's going on. How could this happen? Why don't Republicans pretend that they aren't insane so I can provide cover for them? They are just so inconsiderate, but I'll do my best to screw over Democrats.
That they have done these things that were genuinely unthinkable. And then to further magnify the problem, what was the Republican reaction? The story you mentioned of this young girl in Ohio. When that story was told, the Republicans as a party were like, oh, that's fake news. They tried to denounce the story and claim that it couldn't possibly be true, which is like every political instinct this party has right now is self-defeating and self-destructive. And again, I think it presents, Democrats no one feels like Roe v. Wade being struck down is a lucky thing, but from a political standpoint, it has created an incredible opportunity for Democrats. And the question now is whether they're going to be able to knit all these messages together and really nationalize this election around Republican extremism. If they can do that, like I said before, it might be, this might be one of those historical anomalies that we've been seeing an awful lot of lately in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Democrats won't be able to knit this thing together because people like me will continue to tell the Democrats they're overreacting. What the media does is report on what people say. And they will continue to do that until they replace them with more pro-Republican journalists.
Exactly. We've talked about extreme issues that are out there front and center these days, but also extreme candidates. And we've seen this story before, too. We, of course, remember Todd Aiken, the guy that Claire McCaskill beat in Missouri, who I believe he said you couldn't get pregnant if you were raped. Christine O'Donnell, I am not a witch. Richard Murdoch, there were Sharon Angle, there were a lot of candidates that were to the far right. Republicans lost those races, a lot of hand-wringing, and they weren't going to make that mistake again. You look now and look at Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. You look at J.D. Vance in Ohio. You look at Herschel Walker in Georgia. Again, these are states. Joe Biden's approval rating very low in all of these states. Republicans should be 10, 15 points ahead. They're behind in the polls, and they're getting crushed in fundraising. So it's not just the extremes when we're talking about the issues. It seems the Republican base in these swing states, they've also selected really extreme candidates, and it looks like they're going to do it in the Arizona Senate race as well.
Why hasn't this been a national story? Republican base crazy. These are whack jobs, not fit to hold office. What is wrong with Republicans? America is in danger from these people.
How much does that keep Democrats in the game?
Well, I think this is where we have to make this distinction that we both understand between the House and the Senate, right? The House in a midterm election like this is really in some ways an increasingly nationalized thing where where rising tide lifts all boats and a diminishing tide sinks all boats. And
it is national because people like this, those in the media, it's their job. They just ignore what is going on and repeat Republican talking points. Why should they take any responsibility?
And so you see the congressional generic ballot rise and fall on the basis of some of these things we've been talking about. And, you know, there are individual factors in certain House races, but not that much. The Senate races really make their own wind and weather, like gubernatorial races. And so the question there isn't really as much about Joe Biden's approval rating. It's to some extent the national mood matters. But
why aren't they talking about Republicans' horrible approval ratings? But if they did, no one would vote for them once they explain why they have their approval ratings. Why do Republicans have approval ratings lower than Democrats and their base still votes for them? They're a cult. They want to overthrow America.
But in a race where you have an incumbent in particular, with the challenger from outside, a challenger on the Republican side, if that challenger, beating an incumbent in the Senate race is hard. The incumbent is going to like Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly's going to have money. The state knows him. If you want to beat an incumbent, even in a purple state like that, even in a year that should favor Republicans, you got to put up a good challenger, if not a great challenger. So if you put up an extreme challenger, it really matters and can really change the balance. And then you think about some of these other races you're talking about. Candidates matter a lot. Candidate quality in these races matters. And so, you know, how bad is Dr. Oz? He's getting beat right now by a candidate who had a stroke. And couldn't and wasn't on the campaign trail in an active way for the last few months. How bad is Herschel Walker? He's one of the most famous people in the state of Georgia, and yet he's become very quickly a laughingstock.
Shouldn't the media be looking at why the candidates don't matter? This is absurd. If the candidates not mattering was a thing, the media should look deeply into that. America doesn't care about politics. Here is proof. The media refuses to do its job, and they tell you not to worry because you can't do anything about politics. The media doesn't want you to know that they just don't care. If it is the national mood and the entirety of what is going on for the House, then the news articles should be Republicans in the House are trying to overthrow America, refusing to support anything that will help. And why are they throwing America under the bus? If it was the national mood about what is going on, Republicans would lose. The media would have you believe that it naturally goes back and forth. But it only does that because the media ignores what is actually going on. When Republicans run this country into the ground and Democrats have to fix it, they ignore that Republicans in Congress are just whack job crazy, willing to destroy the United States to stay in power.
You do it, but I really want you to work up a Herschel Walker invitation because I think that would be classic.
Well, I think Butters from South Park fits over J.D. Vance very well. He wants to be loved so badly. He wanted to be loved when he was in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. So he talked about how great Silicon Valley and San Francisco were, and then he decides he's going to run in Ohio, and suddenly he hates Silicon Valley, he hates San Francisco, he hates venture capitalists. So
they are even a bigger joke than this. So why isn't Republicans being asked constantly why they are nominating worthless politicians? Is it because Republicans already have them in the party that the media isn't asking them to defend? Green anybody? Herschel Walker is a failure and completely worthless. So why isn't every single Republican having to answer the question why they're constantly nominating these people? Is it because Republicans literally have no idea what's going on and they just assume anyone that the media doesn't like is someone to vote for?
I mean, it's again, but let's tie these together. You have Kari Lake, an extremist, an extreme Trumpist who is running in Arizona for governor and leading right now, she was an Obama supporter, right? And then you've got Dr. Oz. He was a big Democrat. He was Anthony Fauci's biggest cheerleader even a couple of years ago. And then, I mean, you can go to all of these. And J.D. Vance, this same there, said Christians can't vote for Donald Trump. It would be bad for their witness.
What? Republicans are just in it for power? That would be a great news story and hours of eyes glued to the TV. It also wouldn't take any real work, now would it?
And of course, this all starts with Donald Trump, who, as you and I both know,
yes,
he just despised religious conservatives. He despised conservatives. The guy was a pro-choice, pro-gun control Democrat. So it seems all of these Democrats that have gone hard right and gone pro-Trump, they're lifelong Democrats.
I mean, you remember Trump, he gave money to Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. He was for legalizing drugs at one point. He was for national health insurance at one point. I mean, Donald Trump was, I don't really think Donald Trump ever believed anything really about almost anything. But there's no doubt that if you looked at his record before he ran for president, you look back and you go, why is that guy running the Republican Party? That makes no sense.
You look back? Why would you look back? Here is something that reporters should do. Look into things and figure out, at the time, does this make sense? So, right now, you could look into Republicans and say, this does not make sense. No, it doesn't.
He was like, cosmopolitan New York, liberal, more or less. And you're right. So it just speaks to another way in which the Republican Party no longer stands for anything. It's in each one of these races. And you can mock this if you want, because some of these people are clownish.
Okay. So his entire argument up to this point is that Republicans that don't actually support anything and don't care about anything that they say should be winning, but the American people now are paying attention. Someday when people look back, they'll see worthless people like these two and can show just why Twitler and the Republican Party overthrew a democracy. Hopefully, Republicans will march these two off to death camps and do us all a world of favor.
But they're all now cults of personality. It's like, why is Dr. Oz the nominee? Well, because Trump endorsed him and because he had a television show. It's kind of like, that's sort of what's become in the party. And I do think that comes back to the big issue, though, because of all we were talking about before, that the abortion, guns, Republican extremism. There's that one thing still looming out here, Joe, which is Donald Trump talking about running for president, talking about announcing his candidacy before the midterms. He is still the 800-pound gorilla in American politics, and his presence on these hearings has changed the calculus for Republicans, has helped Democrats, and I think if he decides to throw himself in the race, Mitch McConnell gonna be on suicide watch. And the reality is that Trump was going to highlight, it's just going to raise it's going to raise his profile, obviously. It's going to make him a magnet for attention, obviously. It's going to make it easier for Democrats to cast the Republicans as party of extremism because they're still the party of Trump. And
because they are the party of Twitler. With him out running again, it will be easier to cast them as they are. Just take that in. Because Republicans are the party of Twitler. Him out in the open running for president will make it easier for them to cast them as what they really are. He is very clearly saying that if he kept his mouth shut, they would pretend that the Republican Party isn't filled with whack job extremists, because that's what they've been doing for the last year. Since Biden got in office, they've been pretending the Republicans aren't continually trying to undermine Americans' democracy.
Remember, when did the Democrats last pull off a huge midterm that no one thought they would pull it off? Because back in 2018, when you had that blue wave, why did it work for them? Because they nationalized the race around Trump and extremism. And there are a lot of Democrats sitting around right now praying in the same way that McConnell's praying that Trump stay out of the race. A lot of Democrats are like, please, dear God, Donald, please announce quickly, as soon as possible. We'd like to get you in this race. It'd be the best thing that could happen to us of this year.
This is the most liberal network, or at least they pretend to be, telling you that they are going to do everything they can to cut Democrats' legs out from beneath them and support Republicans. This is who they are. Believe them. When they tell you that they believe history will help Republicans as they work so hard to pretend that they aren't going to overthrow America, this is the same reporting that you'll get in Germany just before the overthrow of democracy. Just because these people are helping the Republicans destroy America, they will still be brought forward and executed. Even a little criticism is something that fascists can't take. It isn't that they know it is because they want to pretend that they haven't been wrong for decades and everything is just normal. The Republican Party has completely gone off the rails, and those in the media will pretend till their dying breath that just one more election and Republicans will go back to being rational. Joe Scarborough pretends to his dying breath that Donald Trump was the actual problem. It wasn't the fact that he was on the air constantly crowing about how Trump is running circles around the media and how great he is. Yeah, that's who Joe Scarborough is, former Republican congressman, so deluded and so badly wanting to not have to admit that he helped build the party that Trump is now leading.